The following video and very existence of this channel is made possible by your support over on patreon.com/616entertainment. I couldn't do this without you, and I thank you kindly for keeping the dream alive. Want a kick-ass shirt? Head on over to prowrestlingtees.com/616entertainment and pick one up. On the first episode of Scream Sequence, I made a big deal out of focusing on one of horror's greatest, most famous icons, Chucky. The diminutive slasher fueled by revenge, a children's toy possessed by the soul of a serial killer. Chucky is without a doubt one of the most well-known characters in the genre. But today we set our sights on one of the first icons of the genre. Hell, he's one of the earliest icons in film history. Frankenstein released in 1931 and changed the world of cinema forever, establishing the character immediately as a mainstay in pop culture for the rest of time, really. And when I say establishing the character, I mean the monster. Frankenstein is the doctor, not the monster. Many of you know that already. The rest of you are like, wait, really? Yeah, I've got a million little pieces of behind-the-scenes, deep-diving, hard-hitting retrospective content for you today. Welcome to another episode of Scream Sequence, razor-sharp reviews of your favorite creepy classics. Oh, what's up, Dan-Dans? My name is Ian, and I hope you are ready to get down and dirty with Frankenstein. Not like that. Or like that. I don't know. Maybe you're into monsters. That's none of my business. My business is patreon.com/616entertainment, and I could really use your support over there in growing this channel. If you're not signed up yet and you enjoy this video, hey, maybe this is the one that sold you, alright? No more talking, no more selling, no more nothing. Let's talk about Frankenstein. Though our focus today is the 1931 Universal film, Frankenstein as a character and premise dates all the way back to an 1818 novel written by Mary Shelley. Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus as it was originally titled, chronicles a scientist's journey into the darkness, creating life from death. The novel and the film do not line up 100%. As a matter of fact, the 1931 movie strays heavily from the source material. For instance, when you hear the name Frankenstein, who do you picture in your head? Maybe the doctor, the monster, and Igor, right? The hunchback assistant. Igor doesn't come from the book at all. He was created for the movie. And his name isn't even Igor in the movie. This guy is called Fritz. The name Igor was first used in Son of Frankenstein, which was the third film in the franchise, released in 1935. Mary Shelley's novel is focused on a scientist named Victor Frankenstein, whereas in the film, the scientist's name is Henry Frankenstein. He has a friend named Victor, but this guy is way in the background, and it makes you wonder what the point was of changing the names at all. These are just a few examples of how many layers there are to this beautiful, horrifying cake, and we're just getting started. Getting away from the novel now, let's talk about the film. In the director's chair would be James Whale, whose prior work included 1930s Hell's Angels and Journey's End. Whale was openly and proudly gay, and back in the 1920s and 1930s, that was far from common. And by that I mean, it just didn't really happen. Film historians have poured through Whale's body of work, pointing out many instances of what they perceive to be Whale telling his story as a gay man through his characters, most notably in the Frankenstein series, which is interesting. While Frankenstein was only Whale's fourth film as a director, the man behind the monster was extremely experienced. Beneath all that ghoulish, masterful Jack Pierce makeup is Boris Karloff, acting in his 81st film. Yeah, 81st. At just 44 years old, Karloff had been acting on screen since 1919. Here's a little trivia. Karloff is killed in the original Scarface. Man, he made a ton of enemies over the decades, didn't he? Henry Frankenstein, the scientist who creates the monster, is played by Colin Clive, a talented but tortured man both on screen and off. I personally think it's a shame that Colin Clive isn't as widely and fondly remembered. His acting here is tremendous. There are very few people who can legitimately get me with their eyes alone, and Clive was one of them.
Crazy, am I? We'll see whether I'm crazy or not.
If we can do one thing right here, right now, let's raise a glass to Mr. Colin Clive. I'm trying to give a little bit of a history lesson here without droning on and on to the point that it gets boring or maybe stuff that you've heard a million times before. We will dive deeper into the cast and all of that later, but let's not go any further without first telling the story of this movie. And before we do that, come on, that's better, right? What am I doing? Before the movie even begins, we're greeted by a man appearing on stage, warning us of the sights and sounds we're about to witness. This was added to the film for several reasons, chief amongst them being that Universal were genuinely worried that the audiences of this Great Depression-stricken era may not be able to handle it. Don't forget that this is 1931 we're talking about. Seeing two lunatics sneak into a cemetery just after a funeral and digging up a fresh corpse was unbelievable. These same two lunatics immediately turning their attention to the corpse of a man who'd been hanged sometime earlier, and not only toying with the body, but cutting it down and stealing it. Again, no one had ever seen anything like this before. You didn't even talk about crimes like this, let alone watch people act them out for your entertainment. It was blasphemy. But yeah, that's our opener. Dr. Henry Frankenstein and his deformed assistant, Fritz, stealing bodies for the doctor's experiments. What experiments? Oh, nothing. Just the reanimation of stitched together dead tissue, the creation of something from nothing, the resurrection of life from death. And one perfect body is not the target, no. A pair of good arms could be salvaged from a body with broken legs. Dr. Frankenstein is dark, man. The last piece he needs to complete his puzzle is a proper brain, and wouldn't you know it, Dr. Frankenstein's mentor, Dr. Waldman, is giving a demonstration to his class comparing an exceptional brain to the abnormal brain of a criminal. It'd be a shame if that beautiful, perfect brain were stolen by a hunchback in the night, wouldn't it? Well, Fritz is an idiot. And he brings back the abnormal brain, not telling Frankenstein about the screw-up. Everyone around the doctor, from his fiancée Elizabeth to her friend Victor and even Dr. Waldman, are worried about him. He up and disappeared into the mountains, toiling endlessly on experiments that he refuses to elaborate on. The group arrives at the doctor's door to plead with him to come home, but the doctor doesn't see a worried and trustworthy family. He sees an audience who will be wowed by his work. With his sewn-together subject lying covered on a table, the devilish duo flip switches, pull chains, and power pulleys, lifting the steel apparatus high into the raging storm above. With a single bolt of lightning, he's done it.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
The creation, though sentient and among the living, remains in the dark for several entire days as the doctor allows him to acclimate to, well, life. Before we see the creature up and moving around, we see Frankenstein learn that the brain he used was indeed the foul, evil brain of a criminal. And that's when we hear the footsteps ascending the stairs, approaching the very room where the two doctors sit. The reveal of the creature is as strange as it is terrifying. It enters the room backwards and without a sound. Just imagine what audiences in 1931 thought the first time they saw this face. Upon experiencing sunlight for the first time, the monster reaches toward the sky, seemingly in an attempt to capture or embrace this bright, warm being shining down upon him. When the shutters are closed, his demeanor shifts. He sulks. He reaches out to the doctor, asking for something. But what? For more light? For acceptance? For an embrace of some sort? Is this not him reaching out, but maybe asking, why? Why am I here? What am I? We can immediately feel the monster's pain. He's a monster only in appearance. This isn't a bloodthirsty, ravenous murderer. He's lost. He's like an innocent, sad child, oblivious to the world's every darkness and light. His body language and mannerisms throughout the film, to me, play almost like he's got the intelligence of a monkey. A lonely, confused monkey, which really bothers me and legitimately makes me sad. Fritz frightens the monster with a torch, and after going into a fit, it takes all 3 men to subdue him. Chained down in a dungeon once again, Fritz continues to torture the monster, cracking a whip at him and threatening him with flames, leaving the monster no choice. Upon discovering that the monster has killed Fritz, the doctors scramble for their lives. Waldman insists that the creature must be destroyed, and being that they can't overpower him, they drug him. This scene where Waldman plunges a syringe into the creature's back was cut from the film for decades, as it was deemed to be too violent for audiences of the time. With the creature incapacitated, Frankenstein returns to his normal life, preparing to marry Elizabeth. Dr. Waldman readies the dissection and destruction of the creature, only to be murdered before the process can begin. Now, the monster is on the loose. But again, he's not roaming the countryside looking for victims to mutilate. He doesn't understand what's going on. He's helpless. When he happens upon a little girl playing near a pond, he's overjoyed because she accepts him. She doesn't see him as a ghoulish, dangerous giant. Upon receiving a flower, he smiles. When she shows him that the flowers float, he laughs. And that's where it all falls apart. If the flowers float, she must float, right? No, the monster accidentally kills this little girl, drowning her in the lake, and he panics. He didn't mean to do it. He was just trying to have fun with his new friend. The entire town is out celebrating the upcoming wedding of Henry and Elizabeth when word gets out that the monster is on the loose. He even sneaks into the house and scares Elizabeth senseless. But when the townspeople catch wind of the little girl's death, that's when it really hits the fan. Pitchforks and torches, bloodhounds, an angry mob on the prowl. The monster's being hunted. Frankenstein comes face to face with his creation at the top of a mountain, and after a short struggle, the monster carries the doctor into an old, rickety windmill. The townspeople surround the building, calling for the monster's head, and when Frankenstein tries to escape, the monster throws him from the top of the windmill. His body crashes against the wings before plummeting to the ground. With the doctor no longer in the building, the townspeople take their torches to the foundation. The innards of the structure collapse, pinning the monster down. Screaming in agony, he burns to death inside the windmill, ending his short and painful life. Back at home, Henry attempts to recover from his serious injuries, and that's the story of Frankenstein. Jesus Christ. You know, for as horrifying as this movie was considered back in 1931, I think it's just as, if not even more so, sad. You know, the monster never asked to be brought to life. He didn't understand anything. He had no time to learn. He was brought to life, he was instantly thrown in the dark, he was tortured. His every second of existence was just pain. Frankenstein is a story that has been iterated on countless times. It has been rebooted, reimagined, remade, borrowed from, stolen from, but this story isn't the only thing that we're going to dig into here today. There are a million little details that we had to gloss over in order to tell this story in a timely fashion, but now I'd like to take a magnifying glass to those details. I didn't really get to focus on what Boris Karloff went through in order to play this role. In the novel, the monster is described as 8 feet tall, just this hulking mass. Karloff was 5'11", but camera tricks were not the only showbiz tactic used to accentuate the monster's height. which becomes clear when we see him standing next to the other characters. Karloff's boots had enormous lifts attached to them. The makeup on his face and head took over 4 hours to apply every single day of shooting. And back in 1931, Jack Pierce didn't have the same type of technology that we have today. This look was created not using latex, but tons of cotton covered with layers and layers of a substance called collodion. This stuff hurt to have on your face for this long, and to take it off, and that wasn't the only pain Karloff faced from this performance. His daughter has stated that Karloff required 3 back surgeries over the course of his life, and she attributes the initial injury to this scene, where the monster is carrying Frankenstein up the mountain. To say Karloff suffered for his art would be an understatement, but he did it with a smile on his face. He was always proud of his work, and never feared that he might be typecast as a monster for the rest of his career. He stated that a typecast actor is a very lucky actor, as carving out a trademark or niche for yourself is what anyone strives to achieve in any career path, which is hard to argue with. If there's one thing Karloff was not thrilled about, it was the drowning scene. He argued with James Whale for an entire day, hoping to cut it from the film. Karloff asked why the monster couldn't just have one beautiful moment, just one instant free from pain, but Whale was adamant that the scene was important to the climax. I find it funny that the film version of the monster barely makes a peep outside of a few moans, screams, and the laugh with the little girl, whereas the monster from the book never shuts the hell up. He gives speeches, he cuts promos, he's got a lot to say. Now that's a lot about Boris Karloff, and I mean, for good reason. The man was a legend, but he was not always the man who was set to fill the boots of the monster. Nor was James Whale the man who was always set to direct this picture. Frankenstein's original director was a man by the name of Robert Florey, an experienced screenwriter, actor, and director. Florey's vision for the monster strayed even further from the characterization of the novel, turning him into a killing machine. No complexity, no layers, just a murderer on the loose. One of the main issues was that the man who was set to play Florey's monster hated it. Maybe you've heard of the original actor for the role, Mr. Bela Lugosi, Dracula himself, the namesake of my dog. Side note, I adopted Patches as a senior when he was 8 years old. His name was already Patches, and I wanted to give him a little extra something so that he really felt like he was part of this new family. So I picked him up, and I looked at my girlfriend, and I said, does he look like a Patches Karloff, or does he look like a Patches Lugosi? She said he looked like a Patches Lugosi, and the rest is history. Now you know. Bela Lugosi hated the idea of playing a brutal killing machine who didn't speak. He hated the idea of being unrecognizable underneath all that makeup, but he didn't have to worry about it for very long. There are rumors that Lugosi was fired or that he quit, but neither of those things are true. Florey and Lugosi never signed anything. This first pitch for Frankenstein had no paperwork making anything official, so eventually Universal just moved on, and they landed on Whale and Karloff. Several film historians have claimed that there was a test shot filmed with Lugosi in the monster's makeup, but in nearly 100 years, that footage has never been seen, it has never been recovered, and nobody knows where it is. Dude, I would like to see that. As you might imagine, Robert Florey and Bela Lugosi felt a bit dicked when their film was dropped without a second thought, and eventually, the two would team up under Universal for Murders in the Rue Morgue. Now, if you're not a big Frankenstein fan and you just have an image in your head of what the monster is and what he does, you may have been looking at the footage from the film and wondering where the classic walk is. You know, the outstretched arms, the lurching steps. It's not in the movie because it didn't exist yet. This classic walk that the character is known for didn't show up until 1943 in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. Who played the monster in that film? Bela Lugosi. So while the man behind Dracula may not have been the original Frankenstein monster, he did leave an indelible, immortal mark on its legacy. The sets on this film range from simple yet effective to over the top and incredibly impressive. Some of the greatest visuals in the history of film, for my money, come from right here. First of all, yes, sometimes we can see the wrinkles in the curtain on some of the backgrounds, but you know what? That only adds to the charm. This movie is nearly 100 years old. The footage you're seeing now comes from a Blu-ray release. Trust me, it wasn't always this clear. No one ever knew you'd be able to see those wrinkles, okay? Anyway, the graveyard itself, with the tilted crosses and oblong headstones, please, this is what it's all about. The laboratory where the experiments are being conducted, are you kidding me? Look at the verticality, not just of the set itself, but of the shot. Look at this. 6-foot-tall Colin Clive is minuscule in this shot in comparison to the scope and scale of the set. And not just the size, but look at the tools, the machines, the electronics. None of this comes from the book, by the way. This is all created for the film. The lab of every mad scientist for the rest of time across all forms of fiction would draw from this. They still do it to this day. It's amazing. And you know what? We're going to get away from the backdrops and whatnot for a second to take a look at something I've always wondered. You know how Fritz dropped and ruined the good brain? He delivered the criminal brain, and that's the one Frankenstein wound up using. The thing is, the experiment worked. Henry popped this warped brain into his creation, and it worked. He created life from death. And we saw how it went. It didn't work out. My long-standing question is this. What if Fritz didn't botch the robbery job? What happens if Henry Frankenstein has a proper, exceptional brain to insert into his creation? Does the monster wake up talking? Does he wake up eloquent, intelligent, and capable of changing the world? I've always wondered what could have been. Now, this retrospective could go on and on. There's so much Frankenstein history to delve into, but I made it clear from the start, today's focus was simply the 1931 original. Now, is the sequel, Bride of Frankenstein, even better? Yes, sir. Is the third film, Son of Frankenstein, arguably the best of the bunch? Yes, ma'am. It's the best one for my money. But what about the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th movies where this original universal Frankenstein monster appears? There's plenty to dive into on another occasion. Frankenstein's legacy is never ending. Its influence is felt to this day, and honestly, I think it always will be. In 1991, the film was entered into the Library of Congress National Film Registry. In 1974, comedy legend Mel Brooks would team with Gene Wilder on Young Frankenstein, one of my favorite movies of all time. Young Frankenstein parodies the first 3 films in the franchise, or as many call them, the Karloff Trilogy. After the original, Bride and Son, Boris Karloff would step out of the boots of the monster, passing the reins on to several legends in the making. Karloff's name may have been kept a mystery in the film's credits, but his legacy is certainly no secret. From James Whale to Colin Clive, from Karloff to Frankenstein, from the Doctor to the Monster, this 1931 classic will never die. And if it does, I'll give it new life with my own hands. I'll scream it from the rooftops. It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! Oh, that's my Scream Sequence retrospective on Frankenstein. You know, that may have been a weird way to incorporate one of the film's famous lines there at the end, but, you know, sometimes you gotta stretch, right? Join me next time for a Scream Sequence retrospective on literally my favorite movie ever made, The Nightmare Before Christmas. If you liked this video and you're excited for the next episode, maybe you prefer my Triangle X Squared Circle retrospectives or any of the weekly Let's Play style content, I could really use your support over on patreon.com/616entertainment. You can help me grow this channel, you can help me keep the lights on and all that good stuff. You can also grab a t-shirt on prowrestlingtees.com/616entertainment. And, I mean, I don't have any big butt shirts like my Charlie XCX shirt here, But I got some pretty good shirts over there. I should not have said that someone else has big butt shirts, because now my shirts don't look as good. Dans, I love you, and I will see you next time. In order to tell the story, and I would like to take, I'd like a take that works. And I would like to take a magnifying glass to those details right now, and that's not good, right? Range from simple but effective to over the top and incredibly Do you want one of these? Then you got it. Give me paw. There it is. Thank you, buddy.